We're looking for the booty gains today. Myself and a lot of the coaches at J3 Coaching, we coach a lot of wellness. We coach a lot of bikini. We won a lot of cards last year in the classes. So I wanted to just come in and give you guys a tangible session to take with you and go use in the gym setting, because we see a lot of people struggle with kind of how to organize the sessions for maximizing progress from a physique development perspective of what they need for that class. So we're going to take you through a brief prep work before your session of like what this might look like, just a couple movements to help you get prepared for the session. We're going to go through some of the primary movements that I would like to see in a glute and hamstring session before you have some of your other sessions later in the week. And then we're going to talk about maybe some options for you to substitute in and out within these sessions. So we're going to dive in. We're here at Destination Dallas. We got a lot of great equipment to work with. So we're going to dive in here in a second, but we're going to start with prep work to get you ready for the session. When you hear me talk about prep work, I take people through three aspects. We're going to find access to range of motion we might not have walking into the gym. We're going to activate body parts that we're going to be training on that day. And then we're going to integrate that into some of the movements that we're actually doing on the gym floor for our actual session. So first one, access. We're going to find access to hip range that we might not have been experiencing through the day. A lot of us are going to be sitting through a large portion of the day. And so we need to kind of find the opposite of what sitting would be. So with sitting, we're going to be in a lot of flexion. We're going to have that shortened iliopsoas. And we're going to have, with a shortened iliopsoas and constantly being in that position, it's going to be weak. And so we need to find access to actually lengthening it. So this is a great one that I'll use with pretty much all of my athletes. And it's a staple in a lot of prep work, is some sort of internal rotation, getting this femur in an extension. So I have my back foot up against here. I'm going to just sit those hips into the bottom, kind of pulling those hips forward. If you really want to try to get a lot more out of this too, you can actually activate the glute and kind of squeeze that glute so that you can get as much stretch out of that anterior portion of the hip. And then we're going to sit back and we're going to move that foot across. And what this is going to do is going to take this femur through not only extension, but a little bit more internal rotation as we have that back foot up against the post to actually activate that rotation portion of it. So this is a staple. Most people need this. 95% of people that come through the coaching process at J3 Coaching need this. And it's just because society, we sit a lot. It's going to be a staple for finding access to ranges of motion we don't have. So I found access to ranges of motion we might have to use in this session. We want to activate some of the body parts that we're going to be using as well. So we're going to be doing some sort of isometric in order to activate this body part. One of my favorites is to do some sort of elevated glute bridge to try to actively pull posterior pelvic tilt, get this as shortened as we possibly can. So what you're going to do is you're going to find a box or something that you can set your foot up on, and we're actually going to do this one leg at a time. So if you struggle with one leg at a time, you can do this bilateral, but I really prefer to have one leg straight where we go into that opposite glute bridge. What I'm actively trying to do is I'm trying to pull that pelvis as far into that posterior pelvic tilt as I possibly can, holding this isometric for 5 to 10 seconds, and then coming down and doing this for maybe 5-6 reps. Really, it's about the quality of kind of how you get this glute shortened. And then once you do those 5 to 6 reps, you'll obviously switch legs. And it's a great way to kind of get that glute firing and activated. Now, the other option that you have for this is once you get into that shortened position, we can also do some stability work. So something like a box step down in order to improve your ability to actually stabilize during a squat pattern. So what we're going to do here is just a single-legged squat with one leg on the box and one leg off. We're going to go down, touch the ground, and then come back up. What you'll feel, and if you can do this better than me, you'll actually be able to get the full flat foot on the ground and then come back up, is you'll feel this lateral glute trying to stabilize. Your glute med's huge in being able to stabilize compound patterns. Those are two options for activation. My preference for you guys would be the first one for the posterior pelvic hip tuck, because you're going to see in the next portion where we start to integrate it, where you're going to actually get some of that stability aspect in the integration portion. Now, for the last portion of integration, a lot of glute hamstring work is going to involve some sort of hinging. In some sessions, it's going to have some compound work like a split squat or a squat pattern. But I really like the idea of a single-legged RDL. Now, with the single-legged RDL, there's progressions on this, but really where I like to start is to get into like a sprinter's pose, move into the single-legged RDL, learn to stabilize it, come back to neutral, and then get back into the sprinter's pose. This is a great way to integrate learning how to stabilize on one leg, getting into some lengthened positions and stabilizing that through the glutes and the hamstrings. but also kind of learning to navigate what that foot pressure may look like in some of the sessions. Now, if you wanted to progress this, there's some variations we can do. We can do what's called a hip airplane. So with that hip airplane, we're going to get into that RDL, and then we're going to explore like the end range of pushing into an open hip, and then we're going to explore the end range of pushing into a closed hip. And as you can see, it's going to challenge your stability a bit. But this is a great one to do for a progression on just a single-legged RDL. Even further from there, if you do have like squatting and lunging in your session on top of any hinging, we can do like a single-legged RDL into a walking lunge. But to start, I would just start with the single-legged RDL. It's going to take you through exploring that hip range that's going to be used within the session. So just make sure you do like 8 to 10 reps for each side. And that should integrate you enough to be ready to kind of go into the movements that we're going to be doing in the session today. A staple in your guys' program design for lower body development and glutes specifically is going to be the booty builder machine or a hip thrust variation of some sort. And I like starting out sessions with this. It gets you into a shortened position, a loaded shortened position when you're fresh. It's really hard to load the shortened position unless it's early in the session. So it's a major compound pattern that loads that shortened end range. We can really get a lot out of it. I'll spend 3 to 4 sets here for a lot of my girls. And really the pitfalls that you want to stay away from are going to be kind of around how you execute bracing this and stabilizing it throughout the pattern. Because the two biggest issues that I see are when we get in here, people want to go too far down into the bottom, thinking they're getting more range of motion, which is actually just extending that lumbar, potentially leading to lower back problems. And then off the back of that, using momentum to get this thing up and down. We really want to make sure that we're keeping it in the active range of the glute. We're going to be loading mid to short and end range in this, so we're not trying to lengthen this glute a ton. And we're going to actually have control over both end ranges with a slight pause. So we don't want to sit at the top holding the weight, but we want to make sure that we're owning it. And this is going to be the first movement because we're going to move from this into a little bit more mid-lengthened work and kind of progress our way through the session and training the glutes in different positions throughout the different movements we choose in the session. We loaded the shortened glute end range with the hip thrust or the booty builder machine or whatever hip thrust variation you chose for that day. Now, I really like in this session, assuming that we're gonna have some quad work later in the week, going into a compound pattern that's gonna load lengthened positions. And my favorite is a bilateral RDL. Now, if you have dumbbells big enough, I'm always going to prefer dumbbells over barbell because we can orient the dumbbells in a way that allow you to sit into the hip as far back as possible, and it allows you to kind of adjust this according to your structure, your anthropometrics. So when we pick these dumbbells up, one of the biggest things that I would tend to look for is setup on the front. So what I don't want to see is I don't want to see people going into this duck foot or externally rotated position. We're trying to load a lengthened glute. So if anything, we want to be neutral shoulder width or potentially even an argument for slightly internally rotated so that when we pitch those hips back, we're getting a lengthened glute position a lot quicker. From there, if we start to kind of look into what this looks like as a side view, we're gonna transition into making sure that there's some slight knee bend so that we can pitch those hips as back far as possible. We're not wanting this to be an SLDL because that would be biasing hip rotation for hamstring. We do want some slight knee bend so that we preferentially load that glute in the bottom. And you'll notice I'm pausing each rep in the bottom because a lot of times you'll see people get very bouncy out of the bottom, which is the other pitfall that you'll find. So great pattern, a staple. If you're in a category like wellness or bikini, or you're just needing more glute development, we got to make sure we do it right. And we got to make sure that we get the most out of it for your actual development. All right, this is a portion of the session where what you pick is largely dependent on what you can manage. So I would do like in a lot of scenarios doing like a single-legged RDL variation, a B-stance landmine or something. If someone can manage doing more than one hinge in a session, maybe I break it up with some isolated hamstring work. But where a lot of people are gonna live and where most sessions are gonna have, and what I'm gonna demo today, is some sort of single-legged work. And I like, because we've RDL'd, and we've had a lot of load on lumbar trying to stabilize and brace that, I like going into something that's externally stabilized, like a single-legged leg press. Now, this will be both quad and glute and some adductor for stabilizing at the pelvis, but really the big keys here is just making sure that you keep this pelvis pulled down. I like having something to pull down on. And then as you descend, you're pushing that force into the midfoot and then finding that bottom end range. You can see like finding bottom end range is pretty easy in this. A lot of people who struggle finding end range bilaterally will still be able to find it unilaterally. And just making sure we don't go into too much pelvic tilt at the bottom and getting lower back pain. But this is a huge staple. I really like this for loading lengthened glute. You're gonna get a lot of quad out of this. And this is just gonna be a gross movement pattern that you can shut your brain off. You can let the leg press stabilize it for you. And you can just get a lot of mechanical tension out of this in order to drive your hypertrophy in the right direction. Now for the fourth movement and final movement of this session, it's a little bit of a dealer's choice here. And this dealer's choice is gonna be based on what you need as an athlete. So if you're gonna need a lot more glute relative to quad, hamstring, adductor, you're gonna go do a little bit more glute isolation work. If you chose a single-legged leg press, I might go into like a 45-degree back extension, or maybe something else that's gonna be isolation-based in nature for the glute. If you need more adductor, I'm going straight into an adductor machine off the back of that. It's a great one that a lot of those sessions will end with a lot of adductor. Or potentially, if you need more quad, and your quad session's not too close to this session, I would then go in and do some isolated quad work, like some quad extensions. Make sure that you're not doing too much so that it takes away from the following session, because as bikini athletes or wellness athletes, or even just a bodybuilder, classic physique guy that needs more legs, you're gonna be doing legs at pretty high frequency, so we don't want it to start to take away from the following session. That's my one caveat with making the end of this session quad work. But build this last movement according to what you like, according to what you need, and just pick the one that's going to load that body part as easy as possible with externalized stability so that you can shut your brain off, finish the session, go home, recover, and actually become a better athlete and have a better physique. Thanks for joining us for this session, guys. If you guys are looking for a coach, we have all the coaches at J3 Coaching that have been mentored by myself and John, gone through all the J3 University coursework. If you're learning to just educate yourself, check out all the coursework at J3 University. We have stuff for everyone, for female, training specific in AHO. We have the level 1 course with the core foundations of the coursework, the advanced application coursework at level 2. So you can check that out. If you like what we're putting out, make sure you like and subscribe, turn that notifications bell on, and we'll see you in the gym next time.